Princess Flora. Once upon a time, in a grand kingdom surrounded by lush forests and sparkling rivers, lived a beautiful princess named Flora and her younger brother, Prince Henry. Princess Flora, at 7 years old, had long, golden hair and a heart full of kindness. Prince Henry, who was 5, had a cheeky smile and a playful spirit that everyone loved. They lived in a majestic castle with their kind parents, King Frederick and Queen Isabella. Despite their royal status, Flora and Henry were just like any other siblings. Sometimes they played together, and sometimes they argued. One warm afternoon, Flora was practicing her dance moves in the castle garden for the grand ball that was coming up. She twirled gracefully, her golden gown shimmering in the sunlight. Flora loved dancing. It made her feel like the whole world was her stage. Meanwhile, Prince Henry was busy building a giant fort made of cushions and blankets right in the middle of the royal garden. He had big plans for his fort, complete with secret tunnels and even a royal throne made of the softest pillows. But as Flora spun around in a graceful pirouette, she accidentally knocked into Henry's fort with a loud thud. The whole fort collapsed, sending pillows flying everywhere. Henry looked at the mess, his face turning red. "You ruined my fort, Flora," he cried, his lower lip trembling. Flora froze. She didn't mean to ruin his fort. She had been practicing for the grand ball and wasn't paying attention to where she was going. Flora felt terrible. "I'm really sorry, Henry. I didn't mean to knock it down," she said, kneeling beside him. But Henry was too upset to listen. "You always mess up my things. You never pay attention," he snapped and turned his back on her, crossing his arms. Flora could feel the tension building. Her heart sank. She didn't want Henry to be mad at her. She knew she had to do something, but what? Then she remembered a lesson her mother, Queen Isabella, had shared with her. Siblings should always care for each other, especially when things go wrong. When one of you makes a mistake, the other should be ready to help fix it. Flora thought for a moment and then decided to try something she'd never done before. She took a deep breath, walked up to Henry and said softly, "Henry, I'm really sorry I ruined your fort. What if we build it again? Together this time. We can make it even better than before." Henry, still pouting, hesitated. He wiped his eyes and sniffed. But you always mess things up. What if it just gets ruined again?" Flora's eyes softened. "I promise I'll be more careful this time. We'll make it together, and we'll make it strong enough so nothing can ruin it." Henry looked at his sister for a long moment. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, but only if we build the biggest fort ever." Flora's heart lifted. "Deal. Let's make the best fort the kingdom has ever seen." They got to work right away. Flora found extra blankets and draped them over the garden's low branches to create walls. Henry, with his natural talent for building, arranged the pillows into soft walls and even created a secret tunnel with a pile of cushions. Together, they laughed and worked side by side, creating a fort even bigger and sturdier than Henry's original one. As they worked, Flora noticed that Henry was doing more than just building. He was sharing ideas and teaching her how to make the fort even more special. He showed her how to use a blanket to create a roof that wouldn't fall down. Flora, in turn, showed him how to add tiny flowers to decorate the fort and make it beautiful. Soon, their fort was complete. It was so big they could both fit inside, and it had secret entrances, a cozy throne, and even a spot for a royalty party. Flora and Henry stood back and admired their work. "This is the best fort ever," Henry shouted, jumping up and down. Flora smiled, feeling proud. "We did it together, Henry. It's perfect because we worked as a team." As the sun began to set, Flora and Henry climbed into their fort and sat down, feeling proud of their teamwork. They had worked through their differences and created something wonderful together. Just then, their parents came outside to check on them. King Frederick smiled warmly at the sight of the magnificent fort. "I see you two have been busy," he said. Flora and Henry nodded eagerly, explaining how they had worked together to rebuild the fort. Queen Isabella, standing beside her husband, nodded approvingly. "I'm proud of both of you," she said. "You've learned something very important today. Working together, no matter the challenge, is how you can solve any problem. Flora looked at Henry, a thoughtful expression on her face. I've learned that it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you try to fix them. And I've learned that when we help each other, we can do anything. Henry grinned. Yeah, and you're not so bad to work with after all. Flora chuckled, and they all laughed together. From that day on, Flora and Henry promised to always care for each other. Whether they were building forts, dancing, or just having fun, they knew they would always have each other's backs. As the evening wore on, Flora and Henry's parents sat with them in the fort, sipping royal tea and enjoying the warm evening breeze. They spent the rest of the night telling stories and making memories, knowing that their children had learned an important lesson about love, teamwork, and the importance of being there for one another. The next morning, when Flora and Henry woke up, they found that their fort had become a place where they could play and laugh together every day. They had created something beautiful not just with blankets and pillows, but with kindness, patience, and love. And so, Princess Flora and Prince Henry lived happily, growing stronger as siblings every day. They knew that no matter what happened in the future, as long as they cared for each other, they could face anything together. Moral of the story: siblings should always support, help, and care for each other, especially when things go wrong. When we work together with patience and kindness, we can turn any mistake into something even better.